Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I welcome you to this episode on this last day of May. We are just cruising through the year. It is spring for many people, summer for some people. School's getting out, the weather's getting warmer. It's starting to get hot here, which I'm not a big fan of the heat, but I live in California and it gets hot, so I can't complain. It's not as hot as when I lived in Texas and we had more humidity. It was like walking in Jell-O. I don't know why I talk about the weather at the beginning of episodes, but I do. It's my inner 80-year-old coming out. It's my inner either one of my grandmothers coming out, I guess. And you know, I know that you tune into the Book Review Podcast to hear about what the weather is like in the Northern California, Sacramento area. I just know that's why you tune in. But if you tune in for book reviews and interviews, then I guess we could do that too. So this is a non-interview episode. And I want to talk about the new book from Matty Dalrymple in the Lizzy Ballard series called The Iron Ring. And then the other day when I did the episode on women solving murders, and I, of course, did a search and I came upon lists that added to my to-be-read list, I saw the Amelia Peabody series and I thought, oh man, I haven't done an episode on Amelia Peabody. I love Amelia Peabody. So we'll be talking first about The Iron Ring and then about Amelia Peabody. Not women solving murders. I mean, Lizzy Ballard actually has committed murders in in some cases. So, but she's not a bad guy. We'll talk more about that. We're going to start with The Iron Ring. It is the third in the Lizzy Ballard series. Maddie has been on to talk about the series on the podcast before. She is lovely. And the books are, I really like Lizzy as a character. She's just unique and interesting. So she, as a baby, even before she was born, was part of a medical experimentation group that was secret that her parents didn't know about. They were trying to develop certain characteristics in humans. And Lizzy grew up when they noticed that her mother was having mini strokes, and they realized that she tended to have them when Lizzy got upset. So it turns out that Lizzy is able to cause people to have strokes when she is afraid or upset or mad, what have you. So they did everything they could to try to resolve this issue, moved her away from any kind of stimulation, etc. Eventually, though, unfortunately, she did end up killing her mother. That's not the murdering part. I mean, I guess technically she did murder her mother, but she didn't do it on purpose. It was definitely an accident, and that really shaped her life. So she lived with her father, and that's where the whole series started. So that was 2 books ago. And again, I don't want to give too much away. That's pretty much just the intro to the series. The first book in the series. I can't talk. The first book in the series is called Rock, Paper, Scissors. The second is Snakes and Ladders. And now we have The Iron Ring, which just came out in April. And I finally was able to get to it, which I'm very happy about because it's been on my list and I wanted to read it because I enjoy the series. So let me give you the description of The Iron Ring by Matty Dalrymple. Lizzy Ballard is headed to Arizona on a mission of vengeance to kill the man who murdered Philip Castillo's prison mentor. Meanwhile, Louise Mortensen and Mitchell Pita find themselves under the protection and at the mercy of reclusive billionaire Theo Vickland, and Theo is intent on recruiting Philip to his cause as well. With the lines of communication cut, Theo sends Philip after Lizzy to keep her from executing her life or death assignment. As Lizzy's allies struggle to understand exactly who the enemy is, Lizzy faces the killer, and even her special ability can't protect her. Okay, so that tells you a lot, and also it doesn't tell you anything. It's awesome. Well, no, it does tell you some things, but what I am fascinated by with this book is just the development of the characters. So Lizzy got into some situations because of her ability, because of the group that was doing the experiments. That's the Louise Mortensen character. Mitchell Pita is a character who has similar abilities to Lizzy and is working with Mortensen. They, along with some other characters, gets into a whole intrigue thriller aspect where they are trying to find Lizzy, they're trying to use Lizzy as a weapon, etc. Lizzy collects this sort of motley crew of supporters and people who are protecting her. Lizzy is only still 17. She's a teenager at the beginning of the book. In this third book, she's still only 17. She's not even old enough to vote. But she has this ability. She's already been in numerous life and death situations. She's been on the run. Just some crazy stuff has happened to her. And she is surrounded by this amazing support group that basically have no special skills. Often in books like this, the support group is, you've got like an ex-military person with lots of secrets, with lots of skills that they never talk about, but they're happy to use. Here you just have some regular people who are doing their best to help Lizzy out. And I think that's a lot of fun. And she's surrounded by this group. And as Lizzy matures and learns to live with this ability, then the people around her are growing and evolving as characters. There's the introduction of new characters. In fact, the reclusive billionaire Theo Vickland is another kind of villain in this new one. And I was amazed that Matty was able to create a new character that almost made me feel bad for Louise Mortensen, who is the enemy, the villain in the first two books, along with some other supporting people. But she is the mastermind. She is the doctor behind these experiments. And with Theo Vickland, I almost felt sorry for Louise. Almost. I kept having to remind myself that she's a terrible person and she pretty much deserved what she was getting. But that was impressive that book 3, this new character is introduced and he makes one character seem almost tame by comparison. So I thought Matty did a really good job of that. This is book 3. You could read them as standalone novels, but I think you should read them in order. I think to get the full impact of the story, to get all of the details and all the characters and everything that's gone into this, I would definitely read them in order rather than jumping in. If you do jump in with book 3, go back and read the first 2, because there's I think there's a lot of good stuff that you will enjoy and that will really enrich the story. This book is a transitional book, so a few things get wrapped up, and at one point I was like, are we wrapping up? Is it just going to be a trilogy, or are we wrapping it up as a series? No, there's too much. So some things get wrapped up, and then some things get opened up. Like we have definite room to move into the next phase, and to see that continued growth of the characters, and to see the continued growth of Lizzy's arc as a character with her abilities, with what she is doing with those abilities. She gains some new insight into her ability, as well as she stumbles across, I don't know, I don't want to, so she has a new ability in this book, and she is now able to use that to help others, which is good, and I'm sure as a character makes her happy, because her first ability, to cause people to have strokes is great for self-defense, but not so great if you just get mad at the guy line in front of you at Walmart or something, or, you know, so the order gets your waiter wrong, the waiter gets your order wrong, and you get mad and poof. So yeah, this was a great transitional book, kind of segueing from those first introductory books, the first two where we're getting the story, and then moving on into where I think Matty's going. And there's a lot of directions that she could go with these. And I'm intrigued to see, because Lizzy at the end of this book is in a place that is not exactly unexpected, but I am interested to find out how she is going to move forward. So we are going to take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, I'll be wrapping up my discussion of the Iron Ring and moving on to Amelia Peabody. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking about The Iron Ring, the third book in the Lizzy Ballard series by Matty Dalrymple. And I want to talk just briefly about some of the secondary characters, that support system that surrounds Lizzy, because I like them. They are definitely a family and very supportive of Lizzy. But again, you know, no special abilities, really no crazy past experience that puts them in a position to really face the situation that they all find themselves in. The first person that we really meet and who is a huge influence in Lizzy's life is her Uncle Owen. He is her godfather and he is her guardian. Lizzy's mother died, and then her father also is killed in the first part of the first book. And I probably shouldn't have given that away, but again, it's toward the beginning. So Uncle Owen is her guardian, and then there's Uncle Owen's brother Andy, who is a doctor. Actually, they're both medical doctors, although Owen is a professor. So actually that comes in very handy, you know, when you're in life and death situations. Having a couple of doctors around does not hurt. There is the woman who helped take care of Lizzy when she was younger and now has come back into their lives. She is this older, no-nonsense, kind of stubborn, crusty, wonderful woman that she's great in the midst of all of these men, because there's Lizzy obviously, but then Owen and Andy and then Philip, who they meet in the second book and becomes involved. Didn't know them before, but then becomes involved and becomes a huge part of the story as well. And so she's got this interesting circle of family and friends. They're friends, of course, but they really become her family and family to each other in a lot of ways. So I think this series would make a great, maybe movies, but I think more of like a television series or something. I would love to see this adapted for some kind of screen, big screen, small screen, streaming screen, whatever it is. I think it would be very fun. So, hey, somebody who has the power out there, get on it, because clearly it's all about me and what I want to see in books. Whatever. Yeah, so those are some of the secondary characters that I really like and I want to know more about. As I mentioned at the end of this book, there has been some transition. Lizzy is not spending as much time with her godfather. She's spending more time with Philip for reasons that make perfect sense in the book, but that I'm not going to tell you about. And so I want to know how those relationships are going to develop, how they are going to evolve and continue, and I just want to know what's going to happen. So, Matty, get to writing, because again, it's all about me, and I must have the next book in the story, or the next book in the series, and I need the next part of the story. So, yep, all about me. I think these are a great series if you like thrillers, if you like thrillers that have an aspect of paranormal, but also that aspect of just somewhat normal people being caught up in extraordinary circumstances, then you should definitely check out the Lizzy Ballard series by Matty Dalrymple. We are going to move on from contemporary paranormal thrillers to historical fiction, Egyptology, archaeology, mysteries, women solving murders, and that is the Amelia Peabody series by Elizabeth Peters. My mom introduced this series to me when I was younger. I don't even know how old, but doesn't matter. They are written by Egyptologist Barbara Mertz under the pen name of Elizabeth Peters. She also wrote under the pen name Barbara Michaels, and those were more along the lines of thrillers, a little bit of supernatural in there or paranormal in there as well. There were a couple books that freaked me out as a kid. I don't know if they would freak me out, not as a kid, a young adult maybe. I don't know if they would freak me out as much now, especially now that I've been reading so many thrillers and, I'm all mature and stuff in my book reading. I don't know, but Elizabeth Peters and Barbara Michaels are the same person, and that is Barbara Mertz, who was an Egyptologist. Sadly, she did pass away in 2013. So the books she started writing the Amelia Peabody series in 1975, I believe. Yes, Crocodile and the Sandbank is the first one that was written in 1975. So I'm about to reveal my age. They are as old as me. The series is the same age as I am, which maybe that's why I like it so much. We're the same age. We're both Gen Xers. I don't know. At any rate, I did mention Barbara Mertz, or Elizabeth Peters, or Barbara Michaels, however you want to think of her, was born in 1927. She died in 2013. The series was finished. There was a final posthumous novel that was completed by Joan Hess that came out in 2017. Otherwise, the series was published between 1975 and 2010. Amelia Peabody is a female Egyptologist in a time when it was not conventional whatsoever. The books start in the early, when do they start? So it's Victorian era, so that gives you an idea, but let's see. 1884. Amelia Peabody is introduced in the series' first novel, Crocodile on the Sandbank, as a confirmed spinster, suffragist, and scholar living in England in 1884. She inherits a fortune from her father and leaves England to see the world, with the side benefit of escaping various suitors and family members who were neither aware that she would be the sole beneficiary of her father's estate, nor that he had amassed a small fortune over the course of his lifetime. So she decides to travel. In Rome, she meets Elizabeth Barton Forbes, a young Englishwoman of social standing who has run off with and subsequently been abandoned by her Italian lover, and the two make their way to Egypt. There they meet the Emerson brothers, Egyptologist Radcliffe and his philologist brother Walter. Over the course of the first book, the couples pair up. Amelia marries Radcliffe, referred to throughout the series by his last name, Emerson. She calls him Emerson. He calls her Peabody. It's very sweet. And then Evelyn marries Walter. So that's the first one. We get Amelia, who is this great, salty kind of character. She has got her own ideas. I mean, it's 1884, and she is... she's going to do her thing. She is going to go to Egypt. She's going to be an Egyptologist. She's knowledgeable. She is learned. She is just as capable as the men. And of course, she runs into tons of sexism, tons of people who dismiss her. And in some ways, in some ways, the Emerson brothers are dismissive as well at first, but then romance blooms, and she thinks, even though she thought she would not get married, she marries Radcliffe, and Evelyn marries Walter, and it goes from there. So each book is usually set in Egypt. The story spans many, many, many years. Peabody and Emerson eventually have a son whom they name Ramses. I mean, they don't name him Ramses. His name is actually Walter, but they start calling him Ramses. Eventually, they also have a ward named Nefret, who is raised pretty much like a sister to Ramses. The story is sweeping in its scope, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. We are going to take our second break of the podcast, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I'm talking about the Amelia Peabody series, Amelia and Radcliffe or Emerson, their son Ramses, their ward Nefret. The arc of the story is, as I said, it starts in 1884, but it goes through Amelia meeting Emerson, them getting together, getting married, having Ramses growing up. It's just, there's a couple of generations that happen, but in the meantime, they always spend part of the year in England. They tend to spend part of the year in Egypt, and every time they go to Egypt, there's a mystery to be solved, and Amelia is the one to solve it. She is on the case. Ramses grows up to be quite rambunctious, mischievous, precocious maybe is the best word. He goes through some difficult times and gives his parents fits, but he does grow up to be a responsible adult. He and Nefret tend to get into some mischief. They also have another friend who is not a ward or he's not a ward, but he is like a brother to Ramses, and there's even an arch nemesis named Sethos, and Sethos is initially presented as a rival to Emerson for Amelia's affections, but later becomes an important part of the Emerson circle of friends, allies, and acquaintance. And then there's some other things. So he's kind of an arch nemesis. He's kind of this weird guy that just, not weird, but I mean weird in the sense of like he just pops in and out, and he always seems to be around when things are happening and going wrong. As the series continues, because it is so huge in scope, we move forward. It moves into World War I. It moves that far into history, and just a lot of stuff happened. There are additional characters. There's lots of people who are introduced. There's characters who are there. There's of course secondary characters who just appear for one book, but then there's secondary characters who come in and out throughout the series. It's so much fun. It's funny. It is often written in that kind of overwrought Victorian style. Not enough that you don't want to read it, but just enough that it's fun to read. Amelia is opinionated. She is smart. She is funny. She is stubborn. She's all those great things that I like in a character. She can take care of herself. She does get into scrapes, but there is some of that, like the men coming into the men trying to swoop in, but she can hold her own. And then Ramses and Nefret, as they grow up, they start having their own storylines, and we see how the family continues to grow. I just think it's really fun as the series goes on, and you can tell that it's written by an archaeologist or an Egyptologist, because that is the focus of Emerson and Amelia's work. Eventually, Ramses also works with his parents and learns from them, goes on digs with them, etc. It's interesting historically because Emerson and Peabody are English, and they are in Egypt at a time when things are not being handled well in terms of archaeology and tomb raiding, those sorts of things. They are definitely have moral codes and standards that a lot of others do not. A lot of Egyptian artifacts were taken out of the country at this time. There's that tension between Egypt and the treasures of Egypt that should stay in Egypt, but they are being taken, etc. So you learn a lot about the history. You learn a lot about international history that leads up to World War I spoke the other day about the Maisie Dobbs series, which starts in World War I, but we're moving up into World War II. And this one, you get some of the precursor events of World War I. So if you are a fan of historical fiction, then you may want to check this one out. So in terms of the order, there are 20 books. The first 18 of them were written in chronological order, with the exception of Guardian of the Horizon, which was the 16th book published, but 11th in the series chronology. Okay, so at least that's only one. That's not too bad. In a 2003 book talk at the Library of Congress, Elizabeth Peters revealed that her overall plan was to continue the series chronologically through World War I and end with the events surrounding the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, as the aging of the characters in real time presented a challenge to extending the series further. Although her age is only given in the first book, Amelia would have been 70 and Emerson 67 or 68 by that point in history. So this would make, it would make them old for the time, especially for the adventures that they get themselves into. Obviously, there's the younger generation, but they really are those main. They're the glue that holds the series together. In that same talk, Peters stated that installments written after that point would fill in the gaps in the series chronology, as there were gaps of several years between some volumes. So the next, and turns out last book to be published, A River in the Sky, which is the 19th book in publication order, was retroactively inserted into the series chronology as the 12th book. Okay, so this is one of those series that you may want to type in Amelia Peabody series in order, and then you can read them chronologically in order. The last one, which is The Painted Queen, that's the one that came out in 2017, was completed by Joan Hess, is actually 14th in the series. As I mentioned before, that is the one that was completed. So there are a couple that are written, according to this list, just two, A River in the Sky and The Painted Queen, are the only two that are chronologically out of order from their publication date. So I love Amelia Peabody. I have not read the most recent book that came out in 2017. I need to do that. Actually, my sister had it when I was home in April, and she said I could borrow it, and I forgot to take it. Terrible, terrible book podcaster. I will have to, check it out from the library, or see if my sister will lend it to me next time I go home, or buy it, or, something. I'm sure I can figure out a way to read this book, or get it on audiobook, because that's what I do a lot. At any rate, the Lizzy Ballard series, you should definitely check that out. There's 3 right now, so you have a good trilogy to immerse yourself in. If you're looking for something a little broader in terms of number of books and time period, you've got Elizabeth Peters and the Amelia Peabody series with 20 books covering a period of, 38 years from 1884 to 1922, 1920. What did it say? Anyway, somewhere in there. I think it said 1922. So a good chunk of time and a lot of books, lots of mysteries, lots of adventures, lots of intrigue, and humor as well. Humor, some romance, all those good things. So two book series that I highly recommend if you are looking for something new to read. So that wraps up this episode of the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Please join me on Tuesday when I will be interviewing Carl Vonderau about his debut novel, Murderabilia. It is a thriller. The main character is the son of a serial killer, and there's lots of drama and intrigue and, all those good things that happen in a thriller. So join me for that interview on Tuesday. In the meantime, I hope you have a great weekend and find some time to go out and get lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.